What is up, everybody? Happy Saturday morning to you, and those of you who might be watching us live on the RotoGrinders videos page or on YouTube. Appreciate you getting up and checking out a live program here with your morning coffee, because we've got some NFL action today. Two Saturday games here for Week 18. So we're here to break it down for you. Justin Van Zuden, that's me, STL Cardinals 84. I've got Tim Buell alongside. We'll be doing another live show right before the first game locks this afternoon, but getting you a little early video out there with our initial thoughts on this two-game Saturday slate. So we'll break it down here for you in the next 25 minutes, half hour or so, and then be back with you before roster lock and first NFL action we've had in a while. Thankfully, very positive updates on the status of Damar Hamlin for the Bills. That's obviously been the headline topic over the last week, and sounds like he is improving significantly. So that's good for him, for the league, for all the fans. It was pretty remarkable to see all the support coming out for him there after that incident on Monday Night Football. So, Tim, how you doing this weekend?
I'm doing pretty well, Justin. Did some of my work for the NHL projections this week and grinding along in NHL, and now we're winding down with some NFL. It's a pretty interesting two-game slate. I think there's a lot of different ways that people can go, and I'm pretty excited to break it down.
Yeah, it should be an entertaining day of football. We got the Chiefs and the Raiders getting things kick-started this afternoon. The Chiefs certainly still motivated with a chance to lock up that number one seed in the AFC playoffs. There has been some talk about if there's a Kansas City-Buffalo AFC championship game, because Buffalo has played obviously one fewer game, that could be held at a neutral site. But the Chiefs would still get the number one overall seed and that first round bye in the playoffs, which obviously only one team gets now. So the Chiefs clearly motivated to close out their season on a high note. The Raiders, of course, just playing out the string, but Jarrett Stidham was a nice surprise last week. And then we've got the Titans and the Jaguars in the nightcap in what is essentially the first game of the playoffs. The winner of that game wins the AFC South, and the loser goes home and ends their season. Two teams there that have been trending in opposite directions, with the Jags playing well and the Titans struggling somewhat as a result of injuries over the past month. But clearly four teams that are going to, play their guys today. The Raiders would certainly love to play spoiler against the Chiefs with their division rivals, though they're the only team, quote unquote, that has nothing to play for. So just in general, we'll kind of go through the positions here, but how do you see these two games playing out? Do you expect the Chiefs to, control the Raiders? And then what happens in that big matchup in Jacksonville tonight?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define control the Raiders. I expect the Chiefs to win, but I think that the Raiders are going to show quite a bit of pride against the Chiefs. It's a rivalry game, and I don't know if I necessarily bet the Chiefs to cover, but I think that they will control the tempo of the game, if that makes sense. I think that it's going to be a fairly high scoring game also. I think if I had to lean one way in that game, I'd go with the over. It's definitely a good game to attack in terms of DFS. The Tennessee Jacksonville game, I'm a little bit struggling with. Like, I think I would go and take the points with Tennessee. Even if Jacksonville wins the game, I don't think they're going to cover. So that game I think is a little bit harder for me to figure out, and I'll break down some of those reasons why I'm struggling with it as we go along. But just the way that the prices are laid out, I think that game is a lot harder to kind of figure out, and there's a lot of ownership going to some of those pieces too.
Yeah, so we got about a 51-point total. The Chiefs close to 10-point road favorites. That's a big number in the NFL for a road team against the Raiders. So the Chiefs projected for around 31 points, the Raiders about 21 points, and then we got about a 5-point spread and a lower total in that Tennessee-Jacksonville game tonight. So let's start by going through DraftKings here. And since we've got two games, we'll go on a position-by-position basis. Obviously, we've got four quarterbacks. Joshua Dobbs is going to get the start for Tennessee tonight. Has looked reasonably competent, at least a little bit better than the other options that they've tried with Tannehill out. So Dobbs is going to get the start tonight. Of course, we've got Stidham starting for the Raiders, had a big game last week. And then we've got Mahomes and Lawrence as kind of your top two. Lawrence has a questionable tag, but there's no real concern over his status. He'll be out there. So, I mean, the question becomes, do we need to jam in Mahomes at 8,400 on DK?
I don't think we need to. I think it really just comes down to the three quarterbacks, the Mahomes, Lawrence, and Stidham. Dobbs would be a cross off for me. I think that's a pretty easy cross off. The question is, I mean, if you go Mahomes, okay, it's very hard to play Mahomes and Kelsey. That's the bottom line. So the question becomes, do you go Stidham and then you pair him with like a receiver, like a cheap receiver, and then you go Kelsey and get your exposure through Kelsey that way. That's kind of the issue. Like if you play Mahomes at 8,400, right off the bat, you got 5,200 left. And then if you go Kelsey, you're down to 4,800 per player. You're going to be giving up a lot of opportunity costs at a lot of different positions. So the issue that I have is the issue that I think is that I think Stidham is going to end up being higher owned than Lawrence. Right now we have Lawrence higher owned, but I think Stidham's going to end up being the second highest owned quarterback because it's easy to click his name, and then it's also easy to pair him with a cheap receiver or two from his own team. So it comes down to ownership for me. Like, I don't know if he was going to be the third highest owned quarterback, I'd be much happier to play him. But I personally think that he's going to be the second highest owned quarterback. And, I don't know if I want to, be going with the field on a heavily owned Jarrett Stidham. That's kind of my issue. So those are things that I think that we all kind of have to think about as we're building our teams today for this 2-game slate.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I'll generally end up with more Lawrence too if that ends up being the case. And obviously another point that you kind of hinted at is that Mahomes is expensive, and there's effectively one stud at every position. And no offense to Jacobs, but as a 10-point underdog, I think everyone's going to agree that Henry is the RB1 on the slate. So you got a clear QB1 in Mahomes, a clear RB1 in Henry, a clear wide receiver 1 in Adams, and a clear tight end 1 in Kelsey. Nobody's going to argue with you that those guys are the top overall projected scorers at their respective positions, but you can't fit them all in, obviously, with DFS. We live in a world of salary cap, and if you wanted to play Mahomes, Henry, Adams, and Kelsey together in a lineup, you've only got $3,300 per player to fill out like 5 spots, which is, pretty much not doable. So you're going to have to make a sacrifice at a position or two, and not play the top projected play. So it all comes down to maybe which guy or two you feel a little less comfortable with, and that's probably the guy you're going to have to leave off because you can't play all 4 in all likelihood. So it's not like we've Go ahead.
If I'm not worried about ownership, like if I'm not worried about getting leverage or anything like that, I think I would play Jarrett Stidham in a cash game setting. It's just in like a large field setting. I'm just a little bit hesitant. Like I think in a large field setting, I might lean towards Lawrence.
Yeah, I like Lawrence a good bit as well. I mean, obviously he's been playing good football, and the Jaguars didn't rest their players last week. They kept them going, but they just blew the doors off of Houston, and so they didn't really need to throw the ball. So don't worry about his numbers from last week. I think he'll be fine. And a guy that I'm definitely looking to target in tournament builds as well.
The other thing I wanted to just briefly touch on with quarterback is another way you could get different with your Chief stacks is to go Mahomes without Kelsey, and go Mahomes and like McKinnon, or like Mahomes and Juju, or Tony, something like that. So you're getting the best quarterback on the slate. And then you just try to fade Kelsey, which is obviously terrifying, but could be a way to separate yourself in a large field setting.
All right, let's go ahead and move to running back here, where again we do have the clear RB1s for these teams. Henry, Jacobs, Etienne has emerged for Jacksonville, and then Pacheco has emerged as the early down back of choice for Kansas City. And McKinnon has been very good in the passing game of late. Outside of that, you don't really have viable plays. It's basically 5 options at running back, and the cheapest one is 5,600, unless you want to get super creative with a Jermichael Hasty or something like that. But that just it feels really thin. So basically, you're at Henry, Jacobs, Etienne, Pacheco, and McKinnon. How are you? And with Henry at like 65% projected ownership, though he's probably going to get the ball like 30 times if this game is competitive. So, how do you break down the running backs here?
Another running back that I would just add to the pool real quick might be Zamir White. We do have him projected for 7 points, and he's 22% ownership at the Stone Min. So he's just, I'm not saying that you have to play him or anything, but I think he's worthy in your large field settings. Derrick Henry's obviously the top guy. I think I would prioritize Henry over Mahomes, if that makes sense. Like in terms of my like 8K spend, like if I'm going to spend 8,000 on a player, I think I would rank Henry over Mahomes, just because the volume he's going to get is just going to be insane. Like the only chance that they're going to be competitive in this game is if he has a big game. So I think that he would be my priority spend today. He's going to be super, super high owned, though. We have him projected for 65% ownership, and I completely believe that. So I can understand if you wanted to take like an underweight stance. If you wanted to go underweight on Henry, ETN would be my next favorite. I know I just said that you could play him in tournaments, but like McKinnon is going to progress big time. He can't just keep catching these balls and scoring touchdowns on every play. Like I'm not really buying this production, but then again, I've been thinking that for like 3 or 4 weeks, maybe longer. I don't know. So I never play him. He always crushes me. So, do what you want with that info, but I'd much rather play ETN than McKinnon. And then I think Josh Jacobs, like, I know that they're huge underdogs, but he still is getting the opportunities and the touches. So if this game can kind of stay at a neutral script, I think he's got potential. And at 24% ownership, I mean that's pretty decent. Like that's way lower owned than ETN, and it's similar to McKinnon and Pacheco. So I think he's definitely worth maybe matching the field in tournaments.
Yeah, he's listed questionable with the hip and oblique issue, but he's been listed questionable for about a month now and hasn't missed a game. Of course, if he happens to be a surprise inactive, that's the first game, so we'll have you updated right on the pre-lock show. And then, Abdullah, Zamir White, potentially Bolden would be in line for larger roles, and they're all really cheap. So that would change the landscape if Jacobs happens to get ruled out, but that's not expected at this point. We'll keep an eye on it. Otherwise, pretty much in agreement with your thoughts there. I've been fading McKinnon as well, and now he's, up to $6,300, and I am definitely not jumping on the bandwagon at this price and at this stage. So we'll go down with that ship together this week. So anything else at running back, or you want to move on to the pass catchers?
Yeah, let's just go to the pass catchers.
All right, so let's talk, and we can probably talk wide receiver and tight end here together because, again, you've got 2 elite options. We've already kind of touched on Kelce a little bit here and there, and then you've got Davante Adams as the clear top wide receiver on the slate, and then there's really not a lot of other spends at the wide receiver position. $2,600 difference on DraftKings between Adams and the next priced guy. So how are you ranking at least your priority for a few of these pass catchers here?
It's just tough. Like I want to go Stidham and then Adams and then Henry. I don't know if that's gonna leave me. Let me just check real quick. I don't know. It's pretty tough. So that's what I would want to do. and that would leave me with 4,600 per player. That's pretty. I mean, it's doable, but it's pretty tough. And I think that I might have to leave Adams off and just try to maybe go more balanced. With like with like a Kirk or Zay Jones, Mac Hollins, Hunter Renfro. We'll get to tight end, but Darren Waller. Pair Waller with Stidham, something like that. Might be like a more appropriate play. See, I'm still prioritizing. The bottom line is I'm still prioritizing Henry over Adams, and I'm prioritizing Henry over Mahomes. So it's tough to get two of those 8K guys in the same lineup. You're really looking at some pretty ugly stuff. So it's just I don't want to fade Adams, but I think I just have to take a stand and make Henry my guy. If you don't agree with me on Henry, then I think you've got to play Adams. I think that's your next guy in. So because Stidham and Adams, that two man right there could be a slate winner easily.
Yeah, and you got to spend up somewhere. Obviously, the fully balanced approach just doesn't look optimal on this slate just because we've got one top end guy at each position. So it would certainly be a little bit different, but fading Mahomes and Kelsey and Henry and Adams, one of those guys is going to have a big night or afternoon, you'd think. So you mentioned potentially getting uncomfortable, and that's probably where we're ending up at wide receiver. Once you get past the top range, you're probably going to, maybe be able to fit one of these mid-range guys. So maybe one of Kirk, Juju, Zay Jones, and then we're basically into punts from there. And like it or not, the slate is probably going to be decided by a 4K or a 3K wide receiver scoring a touchdown and having 4 or 5 catches. And, it's just where the differentiation comes in because you've got more options down there. You've got a Mac Hollins or a Robert Woods or a Tony or a Valdez Scantling or a Marvin Jones. Whoever you pick out of that group, there's going to be some zero. There's going to be some goose eggs in there, and there's maybe going to be somebody who gets 12 or 14 points. So who do you like out of this group of cheaper guys?
Hunter Renfro would probably be my favorite. He's probably not going to he doesn't have a huge ceiling, but you don't need a huge ceiling out of this group. I believe in that he'll get at least 3 or 4 targets. I feel safe with his floor. I think you could play him in cash games even depending on your build. So he would be you go Stidham, Adams, Renfro, Henry, then you could go like Pacheco or something like that. And it's doable. So I think that he would be my favorite out of that sub 4K tier.
Yeah, he definitely makes some sense. I like Marvin Jones a decent amount too, particularly if you've got some lineups where you're not playing Kirk or Zay Jones, who are going to be somewhat popular. He got 7 targets last week, had a 6-target game a few weeks back. Obviously, the floor is low, but and if Jacksonville, gets out to a decent lead, the snaps might be somewhat of a concern, but I do like him in GPP builds as well. But again, you can mix and match these guys. Nobody that I want to go 60-70% on if you're multi-entering. Anybody cheaper at tight end? Like if you're in some fade Kelsey spots, everyone else is cheap compared to him. You got Ingram, Waller, maybe one of the other Tennessee guys like Okonkwo or Hooper snags a touchdown, which is, with their quarterback play, certainly risky. They're going to need to probably score. But any cheaper tight ends that you feel okay with?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Pretty much Austin Hooper would be the only guy. Super large fields, maybe like Noah Gray if you want to get really insane. Those. But like what you said, that could be the difference. A play like that in a slate like this, he scores a touchdown, and you're golden. So it's almost like this is like we're playing Showdown. You're gonna need to take chances on these really, really cheap guys. But if I'm not, I'm probably not going to be able to play Kelsey in my single entry team. So I'm probably going to try to just go to Waller. I think Waller's going to be my guy today.
Yeah, I think Ingram and Waller are fine. I'm not super interested in the total punts, but like we said, they could be a difference maker for sure. Defense, it feels like the Jaguars are going to be the chalk. The Chiefs have been the chalk quite a few times in good matchups, and they have not produced. Like even against Houston, they almost lost that game. Like their defense isn't that great, and that's probably being generous. And then obviously the Vegas is probably the team that nobody's playing, but that Jacksonville Tennessee game is certainly the one that's projected to be lower scoring. I don't love playing the Chiefs defense, so are we just mixing and matching here, or do we like the Jags Titans? What do you think?
I certainly can't say that I have any sort of conviction about which defense to play. Obviously, just play who fits, and also just from a macro perspective, don't be afraid to play skill players against your defense. Like it's a small enough slate, like you are gonna be forced to do that. So even if you're playing a couple Chiefs, you can still play a couple Raiders and so on. So it's don't all you're really hoping for is to get that scoop and score type scenario, try to get that defensive touchdown, and then obviously you want your offensive players back on the field. So don't be afraid to play some skill players against your defense.
Totally agree. Never feels great, but on a 2-game slate, I've got no problem with that for sure. We saw it a few weeks ago where on the Saturday slate, the week the Colts blew a 33-0 lead to the Vikings, they had a couple defensive touchdowns, and the optimal lineup was the Colts defense with a lot of the Minnesota skill players.
Right.
Obviously,
right.
that's not often the case, but that was totally optimal because the Colts got a couple defensive touchdowns. So that's obviously an extreme case, but kind of goes to show you that it can be done on a shorter slate for sure. All right, let's see. Let's go ahead and move over to FanDuel here. If you guys got questions, feel free to drop them in the YouTube chat or drop them in the RotoGrinders Discord in the NFL chat there, and we can take them here on the air. All right, FanDuel. I mean, not a ton of differences. Generally, the cap is a little easier to navigate on FanDuel, but that's not necessarily the case on this slate. We've got Henry with slightly lower ownership than on DK, Adams with slightly lower ownership, Kelsey with slightly lower ownership because the cap is actually a bit tighter on FanDuel here. So, Mahomes is 9,500, Lawrence is 8K, Stidham is 7K. So, same approach here on FanDuel. I guess kind of just go through what your primary differences might be at whatever positions.
Yeah, it's not much of a difference at all. Like, you've got Mahomes at 9,500 and you got Henry at 9,500. And it's really, I would still prioritize Henry. Devontae Adams at 9,100, I think is less of a priority. I think he's an easier fade on FanDuel. So that's kind of the difference, right? Because it's only a half-point PPR. So I still think that I want to get to Stidham. I still think that I want to get to Waller and Henry. There's no huge price discrepancy. Like, there's no difference really in terms of where people rate out. Josh Jacobs at 9,000 on FanDuel is a way easier fade, I think. He's a pretty... You can fade him on DK too, obviously, but there's no way I'm playing 9K for him on FanDuel.
And I'm still not playing McKinnon at 7,700 with half-point PPR. So.
Right. So you're looking at ETN, you're looking at Henry. Running back is kind of stale. I think wide receiver is where things get a lot trickier, I guess. Running back is pretty stale today. Like, I think you're plugging in Henry, then you're plugging in ETN, but then wide receiver is where things can get, like, you can embrace more variance because it's all going to be about getting those cheap touchdowns.
Yep, and again, that's probably where the slate is going to be won and lost. You've got Renfrow, who we mentioned on DK, is 5,300 on FanDuel. Valdez-Scantling, 5,400 on FanDuel. Again, there's not a lot of differences in where the guys are at in terms of pricing. These cheaper wide receivers are all kind of bunched up in that 5K range. Marvin Jones, 5,500. Robert Woods 5,700. But because the cap floor for each individual player is higher, like on DraftKings, these guys are in the 3Ks, or as on FanDuel, they're in the 5Ks. That's what makes the overall cap navigation a little bit tighter, and why you're kind of going to see slightly lower ownership on the star players. You might have to go without a couple of them on FanDuel, whereas on DraftKings, you can maybe get in 3 of the 4 kind of top end plays, talking Mahomes, Kelsey, Henry, Adams. You're probably not getting 3 of them on FanDuel. Maybe it's only 2. So same general type of build. You just might have to add one more kind of lower end value play in there. Don't see any live questions here. Obviously, we're taping pretty early, so a lot of people will probably just be watching this on playback. But again, a reminder, both Tim and I will be back right before the first game live at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, because that first game starts at 4:30. So we'll be live for the pre-lock show. So if you think of questions along the way, you can tune into that pre-lock show at 4 Eastern, and then we can answer your question then. The questions
we've got one question. It says favorite fade for this slate. I think that if you consider a fade like the top end plays, I think my favorite fade of the expensive guys would be Mahomes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as well, because you got Stidham, you got Lawrence, and from my end, on the same token, Kelsey is probably the one that I've ended up the most underweight on. Like one of those two guys. I don't think it's smart to fade both Kelsey and Mahomes, but getting them both on the same lineup is tough. I'm kind of with you and wanting to play Henry. And then, Mahomes and Kelsey together is hard to do with Henry, so maybe you just play one of the two. Where did that question come in at? I just want to make sure I'm.
I just saw it on our screen on StreamYard there.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, I don't see anything else in YouTube. I don't see anything else in the RotoGrinders NFL Discord channel. So I think we're good to call it a show for now. And again, we'll be back live pre-lock right before the game starts. So anything else for you, Tim, before we get out of here?
Just when you're building your teams today, just from a macro perspective, pay attention. Don't just pair like your QB1 with the top receiver or top tight end, and then just be conscious of how you're building your teams today, and try to embrace some variance, because not only are you going to risk being duped, but you're going to need to get some leverage to really win a GPP. Then we have another question real quick on FanDuel. Would you play the Raiders defense? Absolutely. They're the stone men. I think that if that allows you to get more of the skill position players that you want, by all means do it. Don't let defense dictate the slate.
Yep. So many people get stuck on points allowed, and it's such a small percentage of the DFS scoring that, one touchdown, a couple of turnovers, a fumble and a pick, can easily make you right there with the highest scoring defense. And as you mentioned on FanDuel, the Raiders are 3K, whereas the highest scoring the highest price defense 4,700. So pretty different in terms of pricing there on FanDuel as well. So good question, good answer. And with that, we'll go ahead and get out of here. So again, we'll be back 4 p.m. Eastern right before the first game. We'll catch you all then, and if you don't tune in then, we wish you good luck with your lineups, and have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks to Steve for producing behind the scenes for us as well. For Tim, I'm Justin. We'll catch you back here before the first game, everybody. Take care.